Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tableau Speed Tips, where we're going to share tricks for all skill levels. I'm Ann Jackson, Managing Director of Jackson 2, and I'm joined by my two colleagues.
Lana Brown, Analytics Consultant at the Information Lab UK.
And I'm a Senior Consultant at Woodmark Consulting.
We're here to share our favorite tips. Heidi is a new contender this year. You'll remember this session from years past. This is a highly regarded community session. Throughout this session, we're going to give you 5 of our favorite tips each, and then 2 bonus tips from each of us at the very end. Before we get started, I want to say there's no need to take notes. And because we're virtual and this session is fast, please do feel free to slow down the recording to enjoy the tips at your leisure. At the end of the session, there will be a survey for you to fill out. And in the meantime, you can connect with the community live on Slack. And with that, we'll get started.
All right, so the first one is really heavy topic. So we're talking about the order of operations. Sometimes you might have a table calculation and that will get lost as soon as you filter on a dimension. So for example, looking at the winners of the Eurovision Song Contest 2011, we have Sweden in 3rd place. But if we filter on Scandinavia, suddenly Sweden is in 1st place. Why is that? Well, reason is the order of operations. So if we have a dimension filter, that gets applied first, and afterwards a table calculation gets calculated. So if we want to keep the results of the table calc, we have to use a table calc filter. So let's do that. We need a really quick calculation, and this is going to be lookup. Let's call this region filter and let's use lookup. So this basically just looks up a different field at a certain offset. We want the one from the same row, so we use 0, and let's move this to filter and just keep Scandinavia, and we can see Sweden remains in 3rd place. Next one. Sometimes you might want to zoom in on a line chart, or you want to give your users the option to zoom in, and we can do that using a parameter. So let's call this one zoom axis with a question mark, so people actually know they can do something in here. Let's make this a Boolean, and when true, we want to zoom, and otherwise, no, we want to show this in full. So let's actually show this parameter, and let's make this a single value list, and now we need a calculation. So we are going to call this 0 line because that's what we're going to do. If our zoom axis is true, then we want null in here, else 0, end, and that is it. And now we can just simply pop this on detail, add this as a reference line. You can see already I made this really, really wide and bright, so we can see that it's not in here because we're currently on true. If we switch to no show in full, we can see this is where our 0 line is. What we're going to do now is we edit our axis to not include 0, leave it on automatic, and we can see nothing changes because Tableau keeps this 0 line. But if we do say yes, zoom, the 0 line vanishes, and we can zoom in. All you need to do now is make this line invisible. That's it. Third one, we want to format our numbers. So you can see I have the difference on the right-hand side, and I want to make it really, really obvious what's going on here. So first thing, that's not what I wanted to do. First thing that we're going to do is we want to format this. So in here, we switch to custom, and I can add a plus in front here, just to make sure that this is different. But we can go even one step further by adding a small triangle, and we can use UTF-8 sites for that. So just Google or use any search engine of your choice, UTF-8 triangles, and then we copy them from here. So simply copy this one, let's copy this, and let's copy the downward triangle as well. Go back here, and in we put the upward triangle and a downward triangle for the 0 values. And now you can see downward triangle for the negative values, upward triangle for the positive values, but we have positive plus 0, which is not the case. So we maybe want to have a plus minus sign in here. And we can do that by simply Googling that and again copying, because what we have in here is first positive, then negative, and by adding another semicolon, we have the 0 values in the back. So we can do that. Or we could even replace that with text. So what we can do is we can show more or less or same in here. We don't even need a calculation. This is all just formatting. So sometimes you might want to add sheets to your dashboards as you want to do. But as soon as we add anything in here, Tableau creates this automatic container that just messes up our dashboard. So what can we do? We simply move this to floating and move it outside our dashboard. So simply drag it over there so it's not in anyone's way. And now if we add any other sheets, all the other items get added to that floating container. What can we do now? We can simply use this container when we are ready, when we have everything added to the sheet, and add it wherever we want. So of course, I don't want them on top of one another. So one bonus trick, we can actually move in a horizontal container, drop this vertical container in there. And if we remove that, everything gets situated like next to each other. And last one, you may want to toggle between light and dark mode, and we can do that. You can see I have my dashboard in here, and I have a floating empty container that is just black. And we have this show hide button, so we can hide it and we can show it again. Let's move this show hide button into the dashboard, and let's make this whole thing floating as well. So what we can do now is we use this background item and we move it to the position 0 and 0. We make it exactly as big as the dashboard. We can see it fills the whole background, and we do the same for our actual dashboard content. So again, move this to 0, 0, and give it the same size as the dashboard. And now we have a dark mode, and we can switch to light mode in a second. And those were my 5 tips. So beat that, Lorna.
Okay, so my first one is all about relationships and how to make them work with targets data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my data. Order Superstore, we all know and love. We know that it's at row level with products, and it also has the individual order dates. Our targets data, on the other hand, is at monthly level. So what I can do with this is when I bring it in, we have this relationship option in here. Tableau will automatically pick up that it's linked by subcategory. What we also want to do is create a date calculation. So I'm going to use date and then followed by the date trunk of the month of order date. And what this does is it rolls that individual date up to the month of the order date, which I can then align that to my month value. And what happens with that is now when I go into my first worksheet, previously when I had to use data that was at different levels of detail, I would have had to have created an LOD or use blends. And so I'm going to just drag and drop my target on the top, right click and obviously synchronize. I'm going to change my secondary axis to a Gantt bar. And now what we can see here is we have our, let me just change these colors. So we have our sales in gray and our targets in orange. So here we have our targets, and we haven't had to create any LODs in the background, and it just automatically knows that January 2021 is picked up for my correct sales target. Next, on my second tip, sometimes when you're using parameters and dates, you might want to only show the latest 12 months of data or the latest year of data. So for example, instead of having this list of all of my order date months, I just want to show the latest 12 months. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing I did was I created a month field, right clicked on my order date, create custom date. And from here, I selected months. That was my first option. From there, what I can do is I can create a secondary calculated field, which is called this year. If the year of order date equals the year of today, then return this value here. End. So this is just going to give us the month of order date for that specific time period. So I'm just going to bring that in as discrete values. So you can see that it's only bringing back my first of every month for 2021. Within my parameter then, what I can do is instead of order dates that I used before, I can now choose this year field, which now only uses my 12 months of this year. Again, I can change this so that I can have format that I want. So we can have Jan 2021. And also the last thing here is maybe you want to automatically default your parameter to being this current month. We can create that by doing a calculation. So we can say current month. And this time we just need to use that date trunk functionality that we did before, month of today. That's going to give us September. And now when we go back into our parameter and I change this current value, I can now choose current month, which automatically defaults to the current month that we're in. Number 3, pizza items. I want to be able to add and remove elements from my pizza, and I want to do that using sets. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a product set. And I'm just going to select a few things to go onto my pizza. I'm going to add them to color. So as you can see, we've got something in our pizza now. We could either use the new feature of set controls, which allows us to go over and add in a filter-like option. I much prefer set actions. And to do that, I'm going to go to worksheet and actions. And in here, I'm going to add 2 set actions. And the reason why I'm going to add 2 set actions is because I want to be able to give the user the option to add and remove values from our set. So the first one, we're going to say add values to set, keep set values on my product. And then we're going to do the same again, but this time with remove items. And same again with the product set, remove values, keep set values. One thing I forgot, we need to make sure it's on the menu option. And this is probably one of the only times that I really use menu. So I click OK. And now I want to add ham to my pizza. So I'm going to click on it. And now I have the option to add ham. I'm going to remove ground beef. So therefore I can now remove that option as well, giving your users more intuition to be able to add or remove things from our set. Now, this little trick I actually figured out from Anne's husband, Josh, and this is using a buffer level. Here we have on our map a single point. Whenever you have a single point on a map, it always zooms out. This is my favorite rugby ground, the Halliwell Jones. So all it is in here is if I show you this calculation, it's just the latitude and longitude of a single point. You'll notice up here that I have my zoom level parameter, and that is just a 1 to 10 with a step size of 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a calculation, and we're just going to call this buffer. And we're going to use the function buffer from the Halliwell Jones Stadium, 100 times the zoom level in meters. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to use the new map layer feature. So I'm going to drag that in, and now we have our buffer at level 7. We can play around with this a little bit more. We can move it behind our stadium. We can decrease the opacity so it's still there. And now when I zoom in, you'll see that it's getting closer and closer to my stadium, but still having that single point of my map. If you also want to completely get rid of buffer, you can reduce the opacity and remove the line, and therefore it's like it's not even there. My last tip for today is using show hide containers. Now, prior to 2021.2, this was only available for when you used floating. So if I double click on my container and float it, I now have the option to add the show hide container. But with 2021.2, you'll see that option is already available there. So now when I click on that, I'm going to move my button up to the top here. I'm going to press Option or Shift, depending on which version you're on, and I'm going to show or hide it. And what that does is it actually moves the whole container to the left rather than completely moving it away. So you can show and hide. And one of the things that I also like to do with this is in my hierarchy, obviously this can be cleaned up a lot, but this vertical container, I'm going to rename that to be filters. And the reason for that is because now when I hover over my cross, it's then going to say hide filters rather than hide vertical. And I think that just makes a lot more sense for your end users. And over to you.
All right, thanks, Lorna. For my first tip, I want to talk about easy ways to replace data sources and field references. So I have two different dashboards connected to two different data sources. They're very similar data. So you can see data source A, you can see what my overall sales is. And then you can see data source B. It has slightly less revenue, and it's also called revenue. There's actually some other field name changes in the underlying data as well. Just to make it tricky for you, I've changed the word segment from data source A, which you can see right here, to market segment in data source B. I've changed the order date to date. I've also changed sales to revenue, order ID to order number, and profit to profit amount. So let's say you encounter a situation where you realize you need to switch the data source and pay particular attention to the color of the map. So if you pop into a worksheet, you can right click on a data source and you can replace the data source. When you do that, you'll get a nice little menu that pops up that will tell you what your current data source is that you want to replace and that replacement. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now this is simple enough, but watch what happens in Tableau world. First, the map changed to pink. It changed to pink because I have the default setting for my sales measure as pink instead of teal between my two data sources. But you'll notice that Tableau also got a little bit grumpy. Well, this is really easy to fix with the other idea of replacing references for your individual fields. So as an example, my order ID, I have no idea where it is. Tableau can't find it, but I can simply right click and replace the reference and select order number. You'll note when I do that, that my exclamation points are going to start going away. I also have the same thing for sales. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that with revenue. And we have one more, which is profit, which I told you I changed to profit amount. And with that, you've now switched between two data sources. You've also fixed any sort of calculated field or field reference issues, and you're all using right click in that scenario. And now I've got my dashboard A, which has my data source, which is now connected to data source B. You'll note that the revenue now matches between those two. My next tip is how to make beautiful footer filters. So a lot of times when you're interacting with dashboards, it's really useful to explain to your audience what exactly they've clicked on, particularly if they like to do screenshots or share custom views to their friends. So you'll note that I've clicked on the state of California, and at the very bottom, you'll see in hot pink, the state is on California. I can also click on chairs as a subcategory. I'm going to hold down my control key, and I'm also going to click on phones. And you'll see that in that footer, it's going to now show me and enumerate as an array all of those different dimension names. So how do we do this? Well, it's really easy. I like to make a new sheet, and I'm just going to call this my footer. So to make this work, I'm just going to drag on those three dimensions that I said I was going to put in the footer. So my market segment, I think it's the category. Let me swap that over to category, the state, and the subcategory. Now you'll notice when you do this, that Tableau is going to bring it out automatically as a square. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to change the mark type to polygon. This leaves me a blank canvas. There's nothing to click about in here. It's just a perfect worksheet that I can start working from. Now I can take advantage of modifying the title, and I can come in here and I can specify each of those various items. So let me go ahead and set category. I will set the category. I'll do the same thing with state, and I'll do the same thing with my subcategory. Let me just jazz them up a little bit by making them hot pink so that you'll be able to see them. And I'm going to go ahead and click apply. By default, Tableau will set it to all if there's all of the dimensions selected. And as soon as filtering starts to take place, it's going to start doing that enumeration and list them all out for you. Then it becomes just a matter of quickly dropping that sheet into your dashboard and then using it. So we'll go ahead and use the one that I already made. As you add and apply your filters across your dashboard, they will automatically show up in your filter footer. For my next tip, I want to talk about something that I didn't know of until very recently, which is using arrays or more than one parameter or value inside of min and max functions. So I'm going to go ahead and make a really quick cross tab. I'm going to bring on my order ID, and I'm going to bring on my product information just so we have something laid out quite nicely. Now I'm going to bring on my profit so you can see what I'm going to start working with. I'm going to just drag that onto text. So now I've got the profit for each of my individual products. So my audience doesn't quite understand negative profit. Instead, they would prefer that it would be 0. So I can take advantage of putting more than one value into min and max, in particular 2 values, to make sure that we get a 0 instead of negative profit. So I'm going to go ahead and create a calculated field called profit trunk, and I'm going to evaluate the max between 0 and my profit, which means that if my profit number is more than 0, it's going to show the profit. If it's less than 0, it should show a 0. And I'm going to go ahead and format that for us so we can have it look nice and pretty whenever it comes onto the screen. And now let me go ahead and drag that on. So now you'll see that anytime there's a negative profit, instead of showing a negative number, we're now showing a 0. The same thing can be used and can be quite useful for situations where you might be building histograms. So I'm going to go ahead and bring on quantity to my measure names. And I also have built out a bin for quantity by right-clicking on quantity, creating a bin, and just setting it as 1 in between them. So I've got that right here. So this is just now showing us a histogram of all of the quantity associated with the items. But you can see it kind of trails out to the right. And so this is the part that my users want me to adjust. They really want to truncate this so anything that's 10 plus is in a single bucket. Again, there's many ways to do this, but here's a really slick way using our array functions again. So now I can create the same type of calculation. I'll use the min instead of the max, and we will say either 10 or the quantity, which means Tableau will look for the smaller of the two. So when we have a value like 13, that should instead evaluate to 10. Let me go ahead and drag that on so you get a good look at what that looks like, and we'll see if it's actually functioning. And there you go. We can see that 13 has been transformed to 10. Now, by no means you should leave it this way. So we're going to go ahead and put it inside of our histogram. So let me find my quantity truncated, and let's do the same thing. Let's build a bin. And let's go ahead and set it to 1. And you'll see that the range of it is 1 to 10, which is what we expect. Now let me pop back to my histogram and let me just go ahead and swap this. Now you'll see it only goes to 10. And in addition to this, to kind of sell you on the tip, the last step would be to right click and edit the alias. And now we can put a 10 plus there. Now you've got a nice histogram that doesn't have too long of a right tail. And we've grouped together all of those larger quantity values into that 10 plus bucket. My last tip is how to work with dummy measures. Dummy measures can be really useful when you want to make beautiful text tables or precise looking crosstabs that look like tables but aren't quite tables. So to do this, I like to start with ad hoc calculations. My favorite to use is the min of 1. So I'm just typing min 1 in there. I'm holding down my control key and I'm going to drag this out 3 times. And the value of this is you're going to see that I have a measure axis for each of the different measures that I'm going to take advantage of. Now I'm going to drag on my subcategory so we have more information to work with. And let's just fill out my entire viz. Let's make it entire view. So nothing particularly special right now. I've got 3 bar charts. They're all going to the minimum of 1. So not much value here. But you'll note that for each of these measures, I have an individual marks card. So if I click on this first one, I can bring on the revenue or sales, and I can drag that onto label. And I can change my mark type to text. Now I've got what's starting to look like a text table. For the second one, I'm going to bring on profit ratio. I will drag that onto label, and I'm also going to drag it onto color. It's still a bar chart, but I can go ahead and change it again. Let's make this one a text table as well. So now I've got a text table that has 1 column that has conditional formatting and 1 that doesn't. And now let's get really fancy and let's introduce a pie chart to this equation. So now I'm going to drag on sales. I'm going to change my mark type over to pie. Let's put sales on my angle so that the size of the pie or the size of the slice is related to how much sales. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. And then let me go ahead and drag on segment to color. Now you have a really nice looking text table that has 3 different measures with 3 different styles. And you can use whatever marks are available because you've got individual marks for each column of data. And similarly, there's different levels of detail on each one. So as an example, I've added on segment to the pie chart, which is definitely a different granularity than what we've got, or a different aggregation than what we've got for the total sales for each of the individual subcategories. The next one is also quite new to me. This is a way that you can take advantage of dummy measures in a different way. So first, I'm going to bring on my category. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be building a bar chart. So my audience really would like to know what the sum of sales is, or the amount of sales for each individual region. And they also want to know the total sales. And of course, we could use the total functioning and we could bring on our dimensions for each of those different regions. But my audience is kind of picky. So instead, what I've done is I've created a calculation for each of the different regions. So I've got an east, I've got a south, I've got a central, and I've got a west. I can move around my measure names and measure values. So let me drop measure names to here. So now you can see I've got a text table showing each of my measure names. And let me go ahead and bring on sales as well, because that's kind of our total value. I'm going to move measure names up to my columns. And let's go ahead and make this the entire view. And I'm going to also drop my measure names on color. So this is more what they're looking for, but there's one thing they don't like about this. They don't like that there's no space between these 4 and the total sales. They would prefer if there was a little bit of space between them to kind of separate them out so that they knew the difference. So what you can do is you can create a dummy measure, and it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to use the min of null. And you'll see what happens. I've got a brand new section here that says min of null. I'm going to go ahead and move that between my west and my sales. And as a final step, I'm just going to alias the name of this. I'm going to edit the alias on this, and I'm going to put a space right there. Now, when your team looks at it, or when your audience looks at it, they've got the measures for each of our individual regions, and they've got the total sales. And if we were getting particular, we could also go ahead and do the same thing and enter the total sales. And that's my 5th tip.
So now we've gone through all of our 5 favorite tips. We're now going to each share 2 of each other's tips. So Heidi, over to you.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite tips that Lorna ever showed, which is kind of putting a dashboard into a tooltip. So I have prepared a number of sheets that I want to use. I have this one band here and another band, and also this dot plot thingy. And I want to have all of that in one tooltip. So what we can do is, if we go to tooltip, I can insert different sheets. And I'm going to start with this one. And in the same row, I will insert the other band that I have prepared. And we can change the width and height of our sheets that we use in here. So I want to make this a lot slimmer, let's say, and also this second one. And now we can see I have these two sheets in my tooltip next to one another. But if I want to actually show that these are different, I can insert a divider. And for that, I have created this sheet where I just have black lines in. You see there's not even any kind of data here. And I can insert that in between the two, just my divider. Let's remove this line break. And we can change the width in here to make it just 9 pixels, and also change the maximum height of this. And we can see now we have this beautiful divider in here. And we can go even further by adding in another divider. So again, let's change the width to 600 and the height to just 9 pixels in here this time. And after line break, I want to insert my last sheet, which I'm gonna make again 600 pixels wide. And now I have all of these sheets in here, so kind of have a dashboard in a tooltip. But we can see, so if you look at the two bands at the top, you can see they are the same, and we don't want that. So the left one should be filtered on the country, but the right one should only be filtered on the region. So we can do that by not using all fields as a filter and simply changing this to region. And now you can see I have different numbers in here. So that's my favorite tip that Lorna ever showed. And my favorite one from Anne is, if you have a large data source and you just need parts of it for any kind of reason, you can just go to worksheet, copy this data. So all the data points that we used in this one sheet are now in my clipboard, and I can go to a new sheet and hit Control V. And now I have this new data source that contains just the elements that were in my previous sheet. Back to you, Lorna.
My first one is from Heidi, who talks about some false highlighting. So the way that Heidi has done her false highlighting before is by using a dummy field, which I previously created, which is called deselect. And that's just creating one of those dummy fields like Anne mentioned previously. I'm going to add that to my marks card. Now notice when I click on a bar, what happens is the parameter action is taking place, but everything else is graying out in the background. And we don't want that to happen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Worksheet and Actions. And in here, we're going to add a highlight action instead. But we're going to use selected fields, and we're going to use that deselect. So we're just going to call this false highlight. Now when I click OK and OK again, you'll see now when I click on a particular bar, it now doesn't gray out in the background. But I also do still have the black line around the outside. And maybe I also don't want that option. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new dummy field and just call this select. And this time we're just going to put in the word select instead. And I'm going to also add that to my marks card. And now I'm going to go to Worksheet and Actions. I'm going to remove that highlight one, and I'm going to add in a filter action. Select my sheet that I'm using, and then I'm going to use the select. This time on selected fields, we're going to select the deselect equals the select, which we know is never going to happen because they're two different fields inside one another. So I'm going to click OK and OK again. And now when I click on a different bar, the black bar around it is now not there anymore as well. And also we have just a little bit more visual appeal when we're doing our false highlighting. But that's a great tip from Heidi on the highlight option as well. Now the tip from Anne, we always love Anne's tables, and she's a big fan of cats and emojis. Now what we want to do is we want to create a field which shows whether this particular value is above or below the previous year. So we have our previous year calculation here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a calculation, which I'm just going to call this emoji. And we're going to say if year-over-year percentage is greater than or equal to 0.5, then we're going to find our emojis. So as I'm on Mac, I have an emoji keyboard, and I can choose any particular emoji. So we're going to go with happy cat emoji. And then we're going to say else if year-over-year greater than or equal to 0, then we're going to add in the OK emoji, else angry cat, end. Now what happens is I can click OK, close down my emoji viewer, and I can add that to my view here. So now I can see that we have some angry cats, some happy cats, and some OKs. If you want the emoji to the left-hand side, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to duplicate our subcategory. But this time I'm just going to add in a plus blank at the end. So that's a different field. So that means I can then unshow my header, and now I have my emojis on the left-hand side with the OK, sad cat, happy cat. Anne, over to you.
Thanks, Lorna. My tip comes from Heidi. She loves table calculations just as much as me. So this is a great way to do nested sorting on your individual bar charts. So in this scenario, I'm trying to sort my regions per category by the sum of sales. So it looks pretty good to start, but you'll notice that Tableau has forced on the left side what those different regions are. And we have a little bit of an issue because South region for technology is definitely more than Central. So we can resolve that using a table calculation. I'm a big fan of index. Heidi may use rank, but they both work the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and type an ad hoc calculation called index. And I'm going to go ahead and make it discrete. Nothing fancy yet. Here's where the magic happens. I'm going to drag region over to color so that you can see we've got all our individual regions. Now, all I need to do is go in and change the way my table calculation is addressed. Right now, we're going table down, but I can specify my dimensions, both the category and the region. I'm going to specify that we need to restart at every category, meaning go 1 to 4 by region and start over when you get to a new category. We're still not quite in order yet, so we need to do one more step, which is to specify the custom sort. So I'm going to go ahead and click custom. I'm going to set this to descending, and I'm going to go ahead and select my revenue. And now you will see we have perfectly sorted bar charts for each of the individual categories showing the different regions. And in particular, there's my South region for technology. It's gone ahead and moved up into the 3rd place spot. My second tip comes from Lorna by way of Corey Jones. This is one of tip after I saw it. I use this in my day-to-day job all the time. And that is how you can retain formatting for dimensions or measures or fields in general by using ad hoc calculations. So I've got a simple bar chart here that has the product name and the revenue across them. I'm going to go ahead and drag down my bars so that they're a little bit taller so we can read all those individual names. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this over to the right. I've made this a little bit more custom. So you can see on the formatting, I've got this as a Georgia 16-point font. Just to show you what I'm planning on doing, let me go ahead and bring on manufacturer and let's see what happens when I bring it on. So you'll note that my bar chart resized, and this is in a different font than what I've chosen, which is Georgia. Well, truthfully, in this situation, I really only want the manufacturer and not the product name. So what I can do is I can double click in here and I can just use the ad hoc calculation to tab enter manufacturer. Now you'll note that the size of the bars is the same and it is a custom sizing. You can see that because I've got this clear manual sizing and the font remained the same. So I've saved myself about 3 steps by not having to resize my bar chart, adjust my font, or do anything else other than just replace the field by typing it into the pill. And that's it.
And now it's your turn. Let us know on Twitter which one was your favorite tip, and make sure to use the hashtags Data21 and hashtag Tableau tips.
And there you have it. We've just given 21 tips in 25 minutes. You can find all of the solutions and example tips on Tableau Public. Thanks for your time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.